This is the Fujifilm 90mm f2 RLMWR lens for the Fuji X mount. Let's check it out. So something to keep in mind today as we go through this review is that this lens is currently selling for $950. So headline features, this is an X mount lens for the APS-C format, and it's a 90mm lens, but again, taking into the APS-C crop factor, that means it's actually going to be 137 millimeters. It's got a quad linear autofocus motor, more on that later. It does have a weather sealed construction and a rounded 7-blade diaphragm. The aperture ring, let's start with the aperture ring and the focus ring. It has a clickable aperture ring with a range going from f2 to f16, and between 16 and the automatic mode function, there is no hard stop. It flows right through. Now, the lens is consistent in its clickable aperture ring in the fact that between each marked stop, there is 3 feelable clicks. The focus ring is quite wide, and at least on the model that I have, there is a small amount of kind of frictional noise, is what I would call it. Frictional noise that you can hear. It's very quiet, but it is noticeable in a quiet room. As far as autofocus goes, again, I want to clarify that I am predominantly a Sony user. So I'm used to Sony's autofocus, and in my opinion, and I think also on paper and in realistic, life, Sony has the better autofocus. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. That's my normal, because that's the system that I'm using. And I am finding that this 90mm lens, its autofocus is, there's Sony level, and then there's Fujifilm level, and then this 90mm is falling even short of the other lenses on the Fujifilm system. The 90mm autofocus here it's not good. It's over on the slower side. There were some instances where the subject would be in focus and then it would focus hunt a little bit. Although the instances where that did happen, I do need to clarify, happened in a lower light situation where there was less light on the subject. So I'm not actually going to blame it so much on that. But if we can look at this focus pull example here, we are going, from one kind of lighting situation to an outdoor lighting situation, shooting through the window, right? But you can see that in trying to acquire the autofocus of the trees on the other side of the road, or even just the road, it's having a lot of trouble. It's taking like 3 steps. It's like a 3-step loading system just to get its focus across the street and pulling back in. It's doing the same thing, and you can see within that example that there is focus breathing on this lens. So I thought, okay, well, let's bring the lens into a situation where we're switching focus between 2 objects in the same lighting, right? Where it's not going to change. So we bring it to that, and it's a whole lot smoother, a whole lot better. However, in this focus tracking test, as we take a look at me walking across the room, it loses focus, it's slow. You'll notice I'm going to step out of camera and step back in and kind of sit there for what I would deem is long enough for the camera and the lens to work together to say, hey, that's a face and we need to focus on it. And yet it failed to do that. So overall, I'm going to say when it comes to autofocus on this lens, I'm not impressed. Chromatic aberrations. Okay, here we can go back to being impressed. There's a tiny bit of chromatic aberrations here, but it's nothing to worry about or anything that's going to ruin your image. This is a very, very clean lens as far as chromatic aberrations goes. The lens hood for this lens is huge. It's basically the size of the lens itself, but fortunately it does store in reverse format, so it's not really a huge nuisance. Now, you're gonna notice that I've been producing a lot of Fujifilm content lately, and out of using the 16 to 55, the 16mm, and then of course, I have a review on the cinematic 50 to 135 zoom lens, but that doesn't really count because that's a $4,000 lens, so we're gonna put that over there to the side. So I've used the 16, I've used the 16 to 55, and I got the 90 here on camera as well. That's what this review is being filmed on. That's why we're so super close in. The 90 was the one that I least enjoyed in using. Now, half of that is because I have to admit, I prefer shooting landscapes over, closer, tight up things. I like the wider view. So that's personal preference, but also because of the autofocus performance on this lens. Again, I just gotta say it's not exactly reliable. It's not ideal for kind of a more run and gun type of use, which is what I prefer to do. I like to be mobile. I don't want to hike with a tripod with me everywhere I go. So overall kind of experience in using this lens, you've been probably noticed I've had a lot of Fujifilm reviews out lately, right? I got a little gift pack from them. Different stuff to test out and try and review. So I've been using the 16 to 55, been using the 16, and also the cinematic 50 to 135, which of course we're not going to count because that's a $4,000 lens. So that doesn't even belong in the conversation. So between the 90, the 16 to 55, and the 16 millimeter, the 90 was the one I did not really enjoy using out of all of them. I much preferred the wider ones. Now that's partially because I just looked at those wider landscape shots. That's what I tend to enjoy shooting more. So the 90 was the one I least enjoyed to use, and mostly probably because, taking into consideration the crop factor, making this lens really 137 millimeters, it doesn't really loan itself well to a run and gun shooting type format, which is what I prefer, right? I don't want to lug a tripod with me everywhere. So, you got to take that into consideration, but also the autofocus on here, it wasn't great. If you're going to buy this lens and you want to shoot handheld, you absolutely must have IBIS in your camera body. So here's a footage example where this is the 90 millimeter handheld. I'm trying as best as I can to hold it steady. I'm holding my breath. I'm trying to keep the camera steady. It just bounces all over the place. So you must have IBIS if you're gonna go handheld with this 90 millimeter. And here's an example of what footage looks like with IBIS on and in a boosted mode. And whenever you have the IBIS turned on in a boosted format, then the footage that you get is absolutely usable. So let's put a conclusion on this thing. The 90 millimeter f2 Fuji non lens. What do I think of it? Can I recommend it? For photos, it would probably be better. I can't really recommend it for video use because of the autofocus. If you're going to, okay, let's add a little bit more context. If you're just going to shoot talking heads like this, where you're not worried about autofocus tracking, then this lens is going to be fine. It looks nice, right? It looks good here. But if you are going to have anything moving within your frame, you're gonna try and focus track somebody, then this lens is not good. So it really kind of depends the main thing that you're gonna shoot. If you want this lens more for photos, because this lens overall, it can produce a really good product because the images that it's gonna get are going to be really clean. All of the issues in this lens come down to its focus mode performance. So if Fuji could pump this lens out again, create another version and have a better focus on here, a better focus motor on this lens could be really good and actually worth 1,000 cash from you. But as it stands for video use at a price point of $950, I can't recommend this lens for video use. You may very well enjoy it for photos. I think it'd be great for photos where you don't, again, as long as you're not trying to take a photograph of some things moving really, really quickly. So it could be useful for photos. I don't recommend it for video. So an unfortunate result today for the 90 millimeter, but hey, you can't win them all. All right, that is it. That's all I got for you today. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care and remember to let the light in.